In the next few videos, I'm going to show you how to use Unity and Thirdweb to build a blockchain-based game. Hey, how's it going guys? My name's Daniel, aka HashLips, and welcome back to my channel. So yes, we are going to use the Unity game engine and Thirdweb to build a blockchain game. Now, this video caters for experienced Unity developers, but also beginners, people who don't know anything about Unity. The purpose of this series is not to build the best game, but instead to inspire you to start making games with Unity and integrating them into the blockchain using the Thirdweb SDK. So let's get started. For this video, we'll focus on the dependencies, look at the Unity interface as well as the SDK from Thirdweb. To get started, make sure that you have an installation of the Unity game engine on your machine. Even though Unity has paid plans, the free tier for the individual, such as ourselves, indie developers, are awesome and it's free. So go ahead and click on download, or if you need some more help, you can go to this article, which I'll leave a link to in the description of this video. I will also leave a link in the description of this article. This article is written by Jared Watts and he explains everything very nicely about what we are going to cover in today's video. So feel free to read that if you get stuck. And talking about getting stuck, if you ever do, feel free to go to the HashLips.online website, join the Discord channel where there are thousands of devs willing to help you out. You can also join the Thirdweb's Discord channel because there you will have direct access to the team and ask them cool questions. Okay, so like I said, just make sure that you have Unity game engine installed, and now we need to look at installing an IDE. Now, someone in the comments asked me, what is an IDE? Well, an IDE is an integrated development environment. So basically, it is just a tool that helps us write code easier with IntelliSense and terminals and all sorts of wonderful tools. Technically, you can write code in Notepad if you want to. This is just a way better environment to do this in. You get many different IDEs out there, but for those who watch my channel, you know I am fond of Microsoft's Visual Studio Code. It looks like this. Now, Visual Studio Code is a great IDE for generally anything. You can use multiple languages and it fits for any purpose. You can even write C#. But for the .NET ecosystem and C# applications, I highly recommend using Visual Studio Community. This looks a bit different. However, this is very important because Unity works very well with Visual Studio Community and C# is the language that we will be using. So I highly recommend installing Visual Studio Community for this tutorial. That being said, you can configure Unity to work with any IDE, even Visual Studio Code. But like I said, the Visual Studio Community works wonderfully with Unity. Okay, let's carry on. So, time to look at the SDK that Thirdweb provides with their gaming kit. Go to Solutions and click on Gaming Kit. This is where we can read more about the SDK that Thirdweb provides. Here we can even see an example of how to use the SDK right inside of Unity. Now, what does an SDK stand for? Much like IDE, it also has its own meaning, and an SDK stands for Software Development Kit. Think of it as a toolbox. A toolbox with a bunch of building blocks, snippets of code that a developer has put together for you to use. The job of an SDK is to abstract logic and make it easier for the developer to code along with the specific tool. Let's go ahead and click on Get Started. This will take us to the portal where we can now see and read up more on how to use this game kit. This documentation explains everything from setting it up or interacting with contracts using the SDK. So let's go ahead and open Unity Game Engine and install this SDK package. Firstly, remember you need to have Unity installed. This is the Unity Game Hub. You can see I already have a few projects, but the first thing we're going to do is create a new project. Let's click on New Project, then select a 3D project because we want to make a 3D game, and I'm going to name my game Eyeballs. Then we're going to click on Create Project. Unity also allows for 2D games and mobile games and all sorts of wonderful developments, but ours is 3D. So there's the Eyeballs game after all the dependencies was installed. We can open it, and this is how it will look. This looks very challenging, but it really isn't. In the middle, all you need to know, if you hold Option and left mouse button and scroll around, you'll twirl around something called the scene view. This is this middle section over here. If you zoom in with your mouse wheel, you can zoom in and out. And if you click and hold your mouse wheel, you can move around like so. On the left hand side, we've got our directories. Basically everything that's in the scene. Down here we've got all the assets and the console. Assets are things that's not in your scene, but that's available to us in the project that we can add, and we'll see this later on. And whenever we select something in the scene, such as our main camera or the directional light, you can either select them on the left hand side or click on them in the scene view. Every time we select an object, it pops up in the inspector. The inspector is where we'll spend most of your time because this gives us more options to change regarding a certain object. In this case, the directional light. Maybe we want to change the color to more of a red. Or we want to change the rotation. Whatever we want to change about an object, we can do that in the inspector. The same with if we were to select the camera. Here we can see the camera as a skybox, but we can make it a solid color as well. Having the camera selected, we can see that this is now a solid blue color. Here we have a nice representation of what the camera would see. So let's change it back to a skybox. Now almost every object in Unity will have a transform because it needs to know where in the 3D space this object lives, either in the Y, the X, or the Z axis. Let's quickly bring our attention to the assets. We can see that there in the assets there's a scenes folder, and then we have a sample scene. Now this is the same name as this up here. It means that this is the scene that we have open. We can create new scenes and create new environments, and I'll show you that in this tutorial. And another thing you need to understand is how do we play and execute our game? Well, we can click on this play button at the top. When we do so, we can see the game view. Currently there's nothing in our scene. Keep in mind, if you click on something like the camera and make some changes, it will not be saved while your game is playing. It will revert the changes as soon as you stop the execution. So always make changes when your game is not playing, make the changes you want, and then go ahead and test the game. Okay, I don't want to confuse you with too much knowledge on the Unity editor. Instead, let's go ahead and start testing out the SDK, and then you will get used to how to work with this wonderful tool. Back to the portal, we can see the Unity package file that we can now install. Unity can accept custom packages, and Thirdweb has created one. So let's click on that. This will take us to the GitHub repo, the Unity SDK. We can go ahead and download the latest package. It will be the one with the .unity package extension. So just click and download this. I've already done so. Now what we can do is go back to Unity. Right at the top there's an asset section. Click on that, then select Import Custom Package. Go to the location where you have downloaded the Unity package and click on Open. It's going to ask us if we want to import all of this, and let's say yes, import. It might take a while, but once it's done, you should see a plugin, the scenes that we had, Thirdweb, and a WebGL. Now let's go ahead and forget about the plugins and the WebGL. let's focus on this Thirdweb folder. Open that up, and in here we should see a demo folder. Inside the demo folder, there's a Thirdweb demo scene. Go ahead and double click on it. Do you want to save the changes that we have made? I don't want to. So let's just say no. And now we can see in the scene section, we have the Thirdweb demo scene with a camera, directional light, some kind of Thirdweb object, a canvas, and an event system. In order to see this stuff on the screen a bit better, you can hold Option and rotate, or you can rotate using the gizmo at the top and zoom out with your mouse wheel far enough so that you can see this. Alternatively, if you couldn't find the scene, you can just select your canvas and click F. This will bring it in the front and center. Okay, so this is the scene that the Thirdweb team has created for us, and they've added some buttons underneath the canvas element. Each one of these buttons has a corresponding piece of snippet of code that it calls in this C# script over here. Now, just by selecting the script, we can see basically what's inside of it. But this is not the optimal way to view a script, and we cannot edit it. So how do we edit the script and have a better view of the code inside? For that, we'll need an IDE, Visual Studio Community. But before we open that, let's make sure that the presets are set correctly for our Unity environment. To do so, click on the Unity tab icon, then Preferences, and then in Preferences you can select External Tools, and then make sure that this is Visual Studio, not Visual Studio Code. I mean, you can use Visual Studio Code, but Visual Studio just fits a little bit better. Okay, now that that's set up, we can double click on this script file, the Thirdweb SDK demo.cs. CS stands for C#. Now, this is a big file, and it has the SDK, and we'll go through this code in just a bit. Something to note, this is a very big file, and it's for demonstration purposes. Thirdweb wants to show us how you can implement the SDK and interact with it. For instance, how to connect your MetaMask wallet, your Coinbase wallet, how to disconnect, how to check on your balances, and so forth. You can even deploy collections from here. Now, all these snippets of code are the actual snippets that's being called on various buttons. For example, let me just narrow the screen to show you this. If I click on the Connect Buttons group and select the MetaMask button, at the very bottom, there's a onClick handler. This takes in a game object, and on that game object, this script exists. So, I now can choose any of these snippets. In this case, it's linked to the MetaMask login function. You might still ask, but how does it know of all those functions? Well, like I said, this script, this Thirdweb demo script, is attached to this object. Here you can see the script. So essentially, on this button, we have just dragged this script into there. And then we've selected the MetaMask login, like so. When I say we, I just mean we can do that. The Thirdweb developers did that for this scene. Okay, we will do the same kind of thing when we develop our game. But essentially, this only says that if we click this button, then we're going to call this code here, MetaMask login. This will in turn call the connect wallet function, and this is sitting over here, which takes in the provider, the MetaMask one in this case, and connects us. Now, this will not work directly in Unity if we click play. And the reason is because we need the browser who has the MetaMask wallet. So we actually need to build the scene as a WebGL kind of build, and then we can run it and test it out. So how do we build for various platforms with Unity? We can click on File and go to Build Settings. In here, what we need to do is add the scenes we want to build. I'm just going to say add open scene, and this is the Thirdweb demo scene. Then we get to choose for what platform. Now we need to build for the WebGL. Yours might be grayed out like the Android. Then you can simply install it. So install the WebGL build so that you see exactly this. Once you have this set up, we can go ahead, go to player settings, and then in the player settings, go to the resolution and presentation. Go ahead and select Thirdweb. This comes with that package. Then on the other settings, here you can switch off the Auto Graphics API. And at the very bottom, underneath Publish Settings, you can simply disable the compression format. This is so that we can upload it to IPFS later on. Now we are done with our player settings, so we can close that. And then let's click on Switch Platform. We want to make sure that we tell Unity that we are going to build for the WebGL. Now we have two options. We can either build or build and run. Build and run will run it after it's built in the browser. So let's go ahead and do that, otherwise we'll have to run it manually. I'm going to click on build and then go to my desktop. I've made a builds folder. I'm simply going to call this game and save it. I'm going to say save the file before we build, and then it should take a while for all the files to compile, and then it should open in the browser. And there we go. So it's now successfully built. Here we can open up the folder that it's built in. Here we go. It has an index.html and the files that it needs to run. But nevertheless, it's running on localhost. And if I now click on MetaMask, I can go ahead and connect. And there I'm connected. I can check balances, how many girly I have, deploy contracts, and do a bunch of cool stuff. We can do things like connect and disconnect, authenticate ourselves by signing messages, checking balances, like I said, deploying even smart contracts, fetching NFT contracts, interacting with them, basically anything we want to do with the normal SDK. This time we're doing it with an app that was developed by using Unity. It is extremely important to understand how powerful this is. Although this is not the game, this is just a demo app in Unity that explains to us what is possible with the SDK. We are now going to actually build the game. But before we build the game, let me just explain a little bit on how the core works for the SDK. Now, the first thing is that this is C#, not JavaScript if you are used to JavaScript, but if you are used to something like Solidity, it might seem a bit familiar because you do have to strictly type your typings and stuff. So let me just briefly explain. We are using Thirdweb, and these are considered to be our imports in C#, and then we depend on creating an SDK instance. We initialize it here on the start method, and in Unity we've got a start, which kicks off once, and an update method. Here we are setting the SDK to a new instance of the SDK on the girly network. The SDK then knows that it should be on the girly network, and whenever we say SDK dot, for instance here, await SDK wallet dot disconnect, okay? Or await SDK wallet dot connect, passing it in a wallet connection. And we use this SDK to get things like our contract, to interact with it, to authenticate people, and various cool things. This is the core of why we need to use the Thirdweb SDK, and this is why it's so easy to integrate this in our Unity scripts. The reason why I want you to understand how this works is so that you are not limited by this tutorial. You can go ahead and see how the SDK is used. For instance, we can check on a balance check. And we can see that to get a balance, we need to await for the SDK wallet.getBalance. And you can figure this out by looking through the demo code. Or we can then say, okay, so how do we use this SDK? For example, how do we connect to a wallet? And here we can see SDK.getWallet and our smart contract address. After we have a variable of our contract, how do we read from it? We can then see we use that contract and the type of contract and get some cool stuff off that contract. These are all things that we will look at when we build the game. One last thing about the code, you might ask, well, how does it know where this Thirdweb is? Well, you see, this is a class that is actually living in our project. If we go one back and we go to the scripts, you can see that the package contains all the C# scripts that is needed to make this SDK work. Okay, and that's it. And the demo is simply all of those kind of capabilities combined. Now, we don't need to worry about this stuff for now because we are going to build everything from scratch. And I'm going to take you through step by step. But this is the end for this video. At this point, you are ready to follow along in the next one. We are going to continue where we are leaving off right now. But in the meantime, because we are going to work with cool functions on how to mint from contracts, how to interact with them, I highly recommend watching some of these videos where we create a NFT collection. In particular, maybe these two videos over here in the Thirdweb with HashLips playlist. You just need to have basically a NFT collection on Thirdweb. And I do explain how to get to this point, because we are going to use this NFT to token gate our game. I really hope that you are so excited for this tutorial series as I am, and if you have enjoyed your time today with me, please go ahead and give me a like on this video, comment below what's your favorite part, what you would like to see, and also subscribe to this channel. It really helps me out a lot. Then have a fantastic day. See you in the next video. Cheers for now.